I uncovered every secret from the last 30 years.
And I have given all the proofs of who was involved with Diddy. I have presented the videotape of Diddy's parties as evidence. Now no one can save Diddy and the other celebs. Jay-Z, after watching the rest of the documentary, you'll understand everything.
What if the loudest thing in the room isn't a statement, an interview, or a denial, but silence? Because lately, something strange has been happening around some of the most powerful names in the music industry. People who once spoke freely, suddenly aren't saying much at all. No big explanations. No confident press tours. Just careful wording and long pauses. And that silence. For some viewers, it started feeling louder than anything else. Especially after a second documentary quietly appeared on Netflix, pushing the conversation about Sean Combs back into the spotlight in a way few people expected. But here's the part people miss. The documentary doesn't shout accusations. It simply places moments next to each other, and lets the audience start asking questions. For years, Sean Combs, also known publicly as Diddy, was one of the most powerful figures in music and entertainment. His rise from producer to global mogul was often described as a blueprint for success. Record labels, fashion, television, business deals. It seemed like every part of the industry had his fingerprints on it. That reputation made the first Netflix documentary such a shock when it arrived. It didn't just celebrate the success story people already knew. Instead, it began revisiting moments from the past, events, interviews, and reports that had once appeared briefly in headlines, before disappearing again. Some viewers saw it as an investigation. Others described it as a timeline of questions that had never been fully answered. But then, something interesting happened. The industry reaction was unusually cautious. No dramatic public feuds. No explosive counter-statements. Just very measured responses, often repeating the same message. Allegations are disputed, investigations are ongoing, and many claims have not been proven in court. At first, some viewers assumed that would be the end of it. Documentaries come and go all the time. But months later, a second chapter quietly arrived, and that's where the tone started to change. Because part 2 didn't rely on shocking claims or dramatic accusations. Instead, it did something far more subtle. It began connecting moments that originally happened years apart. Old interviews, red carpet appearances, behind-the-scenes footage. Conversations that once seemed ordinary when viewed alone. But when placed side by side, those clips created something different. Patterns. The kind of patterns that make viewers stop and rewind, just to watch again. And suddenly people began noticing something else too. Some of the same powerful circles kept appearing around those moments. The same environments. The same connections. The same carefully worded responses when difficult questions surfaced. And that's when the conversation around the documentary started shifting from reaction to observation. Here's where things start getting messy. Because the second documentary never directly tells the audience what to believe. Instead, it asks viewers to look at repetition. Over time, certain behaviors seem to appear again and again. The same types of parties, the same industry relationships, the same headlines that flare up briefly before fading away. According to some commentators, the film's real focus isn't a single accusation. It's the system around powerful figures in entertainment. A system where influence, reputation, and timing often shape how stories are told, and how long they stay in the public eye. But then something unexpected happened. The more people watched these clips together, the more they began asking the same question. Why did so many of these moments disappear from public conversation so quickly when they first happened? And that question leads directly to the industry's reaction. Because once the documentary started trending online, something changed. People who once defended certain figures publicly began responding much more carefully. Some issued short written statements through representatives. Others simply declined interviews altogether. A few addressed the topic briefly, emphasizing that many allegations circulating online are disputed or unproven. But for viewers paying close attention, the silence itself became part of the story. Not proof of anything, just another detail in a timeline that suddenly looked very different when examined all at once. And that's where the documentary takes an unexpected turn. It stops focusing on single events and starts examining how influence works across entire networks. Because in industries built on relationships, proximity matters. When powerful figures appear repeatedly in the same environments, when business deals, collaborations, and friendships overlap for years, the interpretation of old events can shift. Moments that once looked unrelated start feeling connected. And the documentary leans into that idea carefully,
about what he says
not claiming
with
guilt,
Combs in
not
2011
presenting
and
final answers, simply showing how influence networks operate over long periods of time. According to several analysts featured in commentary segments, time is often one of the most powerful tools in reputation management. Controversies fade. Headlines move on. Public memory shortens. But when a timeline brings those moments back together again, that distance disappears. And that leads to the role of time itself. Because powerful figures often rely on time to soften controversies. A headline appears. A response is issued. The news cycle shifts to something else. Years later, many people barely remember the original details. But documentaries operate differently. They compress time. Events that once happened decades apart suddenly sit side by side on the same screen. And when that happens, the audience sees things in a completely new way. The second Netflix documentary seems built around that exact idea. Not adding dramatic claims, but removing the years that once separated certain events. When the distance disappears, viewers start noticing patterns that previously felt invisible. At the same time, the legal backdrop surrounding Sean Combs has become increasingly important to the conversation. Multiple investigations and court proceedings connected to various allegations have been reported in recent months, although many details remain disputed and unresolved. Lawyers representing different parties have emphasized that accusations must be tested in court and that allegations alone do not establish guilt. That legal reality adds another layer of tension to the documentary's release. Because while the film focuses on history, the legal system is dealing with the present. And when those two timelines overlap, the public conversation becomes far more intense. Here's where another shift begins. Public awareness changes behavior. When viewers start examining patterns more closely, the people inside those systems often become more cautious about what they say publicly. Interviews become shorter. Statements become carefully written. Words like alleged, reported, and disputed appear more frequently. And that's exactly what observers say they've been noticing lately. Not dramatic confrontations, but controlled messaging. The kind designed to avoid saying too much while investigations and legal proceedings continue behind the scenes. And strangely, that restraint sometimes draws even more attention than a loud denial ever could. Because over time, repeated responses start forming a pattern of their own. Short statements, limited appearances, carefully managed interviews. To some viewers, it looks like reputation management in action. To others, it simply reflects the seriousness of ongoing legal matters. Both interpretations exist at the same time, and the documentary doesn't force a final conclusion. Instead, it keeps returning to the same idea: observation. Watch the timeline. Notice the repetition. Pay attention to what is said and what isn't. By the final section of the documentary, the tone shifts again. The story stops focusing on individual moments entirely and starts examining something bigger: the way public awareness changes narratives. Years ago, many of these events were isolated headlines. Now they exist as part of a larger conversation about influence, accountability, and how powerful industries manage controversy. The documentary suggests that awareness alone can reshape the story. When audiences begin connecting dots themselves, the narrative becomes harder to control. And once that happens, silence doesn't always work the same way it used to. But here's the part that keeps the story alive. Despite hours of footage, timelines, and analysis, many questions remain unresolved. Investigations are ongoing. Allegations are still being debated publicly. Courts, not documentaries, ultimately decide legal outcomes. Yet the cultural conversation surrounding these figures has clearly shifted. Viewers are watching interviews differently now. Old clips are being revisited. Statements are being examined word by word. And once that level of attention exists, it doesn't disappear easily. So now the real question isn't just about what happened in the past. It's about what happens next. Because if patterns really are forming the way some viewers believe they are, and if the public has started noticing them, then one mystery still remains. In a world where power often depends on controlling the narrative, what happens when people stop accepting the narrative at face value and start connecting the timeline for themselves?